Sup, Ron here, and today we're going to do a cross-hatching tutorial. What's up, Ron here. Thank you for joining me in another video. And today we're going to do something I've been wanting to do for a while now, and that is cross-hatching tutorial. I've been asked about my technique for cross-hatching using mostly pen and ink. I don't do cross-hatching with pencil because it beats the purpose of pencil sketching. But cross-hatching has been something that I really enjoyed doing, and I've been relying on it a lot in my pen sketches. It is a technique that has its advantages and disadvantages. It's very time-consuming and it can be very tiresome. There are better ways for making sketches or preparatory sketches, whether you're painting or doing anything else. If you use a pencil, quite honestly, it can be faster, but I like the immediacy of pen and ink. I like the fact that the pen immediately shows its marks on paper. You don't have to slowly build things up. I really enjoy that aspect of pen and ink. And today I want to talk to you about cross-hatching and the technique I use, the angles I work at, how I approach this as a process on a macro level, and also the actual technique on a micro level. And I've been asked about this quite a lot lately, so I decided to make a video. So I really hope you enjoyed this one and it will give you a better idea of how I approach cross-hatching, and maybe it will encourage you to try it out if you haven't, or if you're not accustomed to using it. Okay, so anyway, let's get started. Okay, so I think the best way to begin this would be to look at the very basic technique of cross-hatching, and that is to just create lots of parallel lines, okay? So I'm going to show you, and I've been asked a lot of questions about this technique, so I plan on diving really deep and talking about different aspects that I think aren't discussed in terms of this. So this is the basic exercise, and I do have several videos on that as well. I will put a link in a card somewhere on the top corners of the video. I'm gonna write a note for myself, cards, so that I'll remember to add that in. This is the basic idea, and it's just a way of getting, again, a different value. Now, the way to get darker values, there are two ways. So one would be the layering, okay, so the act of placing one layer on top of another, and we're going to talk about how to do that in just a moment. So now I made this area darker than that area. And another way is the density of lines. So let's say I have this area that I want to cross-hatch, okay? So I can just go ahead like this, and that'll give it a certain value that's a little darker, say from this empty one, okay? But if I want to get it even darker, I'll just make the lines denser, okay? And then you can see how it becomes darker. So that's another way. So what we're gonna do is a combination of both of these ways to achieve different levels of darkness in our drawings or sketches or whatever it is, okay? So now, the first thing I wanna talk about is the direction. So how do I even choose the direction of lines? Because this was what I specifically was asked about. So the first thing to take into consideration is the natural movement of your hand and how it's most comfortable for you, and we're all different in that sense. I never learned how to hold a pencil like this. I'm writing like this. And so for me, the most comfortable angle will be something like this. Okay, so if it's compared to maybe vertical line, so for me it's most comfortable to go at this kind of an angle, so maybe 22, because that'll be 45, I don't know, something like this. But you have to test it out for yourself. Now, there is the shape of the subject where it's cross-hatching that needs to be taken into consideration. So let me move this a bit, and I'm gonna explain what I mean by that. So let's say I have this kind of a shape, and I want to fill it up with cross-hatchings, okay? It doesn't matter, it can be a part of a cube or whatever. So I wouldn't go at it this way, because now I have to get in very long lines, and also it will feel like I'm applying texture because I'm moving with the dominant direction of the shape. So what I will probably do is just use the most natural direction for me and cross-hatch this way, okay? Using this angle. But for example, I'm trying to challenge myself. So let's say if I get a shape that's this direction, So if I'm going to use the most comfortable angle for me, I'll fill it up like this, but it's still not good because I'm moving with the shape. So I'll probably move a bit and do the cross-hatching that way. And that way, by working diagonally, I'm not using the whole length and then making it really hard for myself to create straight lines. And I'm not doing it with the direction of the shape, the natural direction that'll feel like a texture. I'm doing it somewhere in the middle, okay? So that's the main way how I choose the direction in which I'll work. Okay, and I find that this method works really well for me. Sometimes the shape is a little more complex and it's hard to decide, and sometimes it doesn't even matter. So let's say, for example, I have this kind of a circle here. It doesn't matter which way I'm gonna go about it because it's a circle. So I can decide to tackle it from multiple different angles. For example, this would be one of them, okay? So this is it in terms of choosing direction. Now we're going to talk about layering, okay? Now when you want to layer, the question is how do you choose the direction of the next layer? So I'm just going to put in a very simple square here to begin with. And let's say I use the first layer with this kind of an angle, okay? And I'm going to show you what goes into this. And this is I actually learned from another tutorial that I'm not sure what the name was, so sorry about that, but what they suggested you do is you go at it, you don't go 90 degrees to the first angle. So if I started with this direction, I won't go like that, not to create 90 degrees, because that'll create a texture that doesn't necessarily feel like shading. You see it's like boxes or little squares. You don't want to go that way. You want to go at a smaller angle, so perhaps 45 degrees to the first one. Okay, or even I saw some that go like 22.5 or something like this. So let's try just 45 degree angle. So that'll mean we are working with the direction of the square or rectangle, but that's fine. It's not like 100% science. So anyway, this is the next angle. Now for the next one, we can work 90 degrees to one of them. So if we have that first one and then not 90, we went 45. So now it's okay to go 90 degree to the first one. Okay, and hopefully it makes sense. Or you can choose to, because that would be moving in 45, in a smaller angle, okay? I don't want to turn it into a complete like science and boring, but basically if you started with this angle, we move in a small increment like this, and then when we move in another one, it may end up being 90 degree, but that's fine. So let's continue to the next layer. So I'm gonna do that maybe like this, okay? And you can see how that works and how that creates an interesting pattern, okay? That feels more like maybe shading than anything else. And then final one, so what we went ahead and did now was we had the first one like this, second one, I just need to think for a moment. Yeah, so the first angle was this, then we did it like this, 45, and then we went like this, okay? And the next one we can do is like this. And this will be our final layer just for this kind of an experimentation. So maybe up till this point. Okay, and you can see how that works. Now, if you want to add more layers, which I think beyond the fourth layer is a bit of an exaggeration, or the third layer, you can work at smaller increments and add maybe, so you don't go like this, you don't go like this, okay? So not vertical, not 45 degree, but kind of in the middle. So you would go maybe like this. You can see, and that can definitely darken things up a little more, okay? So just to recap, because I hope I didn't confuse you. So let's say we have this shape, and I'm gonna start out like this, okay? And I'm just gonna cross hatch to my heart's content. This can be a bit of a challenge, by the way, so don't worry if I mess it up all the time. So don't worry if it's not perfect. So this is the first layer, okay? Now for the second one, I won't go 90 degree. I'll go 45 degrees, so something like this. And for the next one, I can pretty much choose whichever degree I want. So let's say if we started from this, then we moved like this, then let's move a bit more like this. And finally, we can go ahead and do it like that. So what we did here, we started with this, then we moved on to this, then we moved on to this, and we ended with this, okay? So I hope this makes sense. We just ended up having a 90 degree here, and a 90 degree here. The main point, this is the rule, if all of this confuses you, the rule that I stick by and it helped me a lot is to not go 90 degree to the first angle immediately, okay, but to choose a smaller angle, and it works really well. So that's mainly everything that the technique that you have to learn regarding the technique. And I'm gonna just show you one last time, but this time I won't fill a shape, I'll just do it like this. So I'm starting out again with this kind of an angle, okay, so that's the first one. Then I'm going at it like that at a 45 degree. So that's the second one. Then I'm going at it in a kind of 90 or 45 degree angle, depending on which one you're looking at. So this one. And finally, I can do it with a horizontal line, like this one. Okay, and hopefully that makes sense. This is the basic technique. Now, I want to talk about two different approaches for cross-hatching, regardless of everything we talked about. And I think you'll find this really useful. So one will be the more working in patches, and another will be the unified direction approach. So let's say I have this imaginary cube here, like this. And it casts a shadow in that direction. Okay, so this is a shadow, light comes from here somewhere, casts a shadow on the floor. We have two main ways of shading such a thing, and I'm gonna already draw the second one here. Okay, so let's say we have two imaginary cubes. One approach would be let's start with the unified version, okay? So with the unified version, I'm gonna look at everything that needs darkening and I'm gonna cross-hatch it with the same layer. So let's say light comes from here, this area is gonna be darker and this one also. But this one is the most exposed to the light, so it's gonna be the lightest. So the unified approach means that I'm gonna layer all of the areas that have to be darker. So that actually, it's kind of more similar to watercolor painting. So that means I'll start maybe here, and I'm just gonna create a cross-hatching layer right here, and I'm just gonna go over everything. Okay, everything that needs to be slightly darker, I'm gonna go over. So that'll be the first layer of cross-hatching. The second layer, I'm gonna choose a different angle and I'm gonna darken the things that need more darkening, which are these two areas. So I'm gonna go at it this way. And I'm gonna darken the whole thing up. And this is really more similar to watercolor. And next up, let's decide that the shadow on the ground is really dark. So I'm gonna just darken that. So you can see here that I shaded the whole cube. And I'm just gonna blow my nose. Sorry about that. And we got a more unified approach because all of the directions match. Wherever I could fill in more than one area, I did. Next up, I want to show you the patches approach. And the patches approach means that I don't really care about one unified direction. I'm just gonna cross-hatch whichever way I see fit. So I'm gonna start maybe with this area and I'm gonna shade it like this. Any way I prefer to. I can decide to connect it or not, and I can just go ahead and darken this as well, and kind of go ahead and darken this area as well. So up until this point, I just decided on the directions I want to work in. Next up, I'm just going to darken anything that needs further darkening, so it will be this side and maybe this layer, and now I need to change direction, like this. And finally, I'm going to darken the thing that needs the most darkening, which is the shadow on the floor. Kind of like that, okay? Now, both of these methods are completely valid. Some have disadvantages and advantages. So the advantage clearly in terms of visuals will be that, because that is the even or unified approach, okay? These are the patches. Now the advantage of the unified approach is that it gives you a more unified look, and it helps you avoid mess, because notice how we get a bit of a mess here, and this is something I'm going to talk about in just a moment. So this one helps you avoid mess. The disadvantage is, imagine you have a huge scene and you want to cross-hatch it. It's virtually impossible to do it all in the even approach. You have to really analyze everything, and it's so complex. And with watercolor, you can just put the paint and let it do what it does and darken things up and do wet and wet. With this one, it's different. You kind of commit to a layer, and it's very arduous and tiresome. It's a tiring process. And so It's just impossible to do that always, but when you have small shapes like this, I tend to go with this method whenever possible, because it keeps it looking less messy. Okay, which brings me to the final point of this video. I want to talk about how to avoid a mess, and it's very simple. The more directions you have of cross-hatching, the messier it's gonna get. So if you're working like this and you have tons of directions, it's gonna get really messy. One thing you can do is eliminate a layer or two and just work in denser layers if you know you're gonna need a stronger value. So then you have fewer directions, but still it's darker, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is to just minimize the number of directions as much as possible. So not just layers, but if you're gonna, let's say you finished with this and now you have another area to shade here, then you're going with that same direction and fill it up like this. And it feels a little more even. So the more you avoid using multiple different directions and angles, the better chance you have at avoiding a big fat mess. Okay, so I think this is it. Let me zoom out so you can see everything. So here's everything I showed you, and I'm just gonna go over all of the talking points in this video just to make sure to hammer them all in. So first off, the basic technique I just showed you, basically parallel lines. It does take some practice to get to a good level at this. You will get a mess, you will screw up in the beginning, that's fine, okay? Practice this, and it's actually a good exercise in drawing in general. And I did talk about it in a video. Again, I'll put a link to that somewhere in the description and in the cards. Second, values. You can do that in two ways to create darker values. One is by layering, like you see here, and another one is just by increasing the density of the lines, okay? Making them denser will make them darker and will help you avoid multiple or too many layers. Okay, next up is how to choose a direction. So again, I explained how I go with the most natural direction for me, plus taking into consideration the shape. Next up, we have layering and how to choose the angles. Okay, so first angle we talked about, then the second, third, fourth, whatever, as many layers as you can. I find that it's hard to go beyond 4 layers. For example, if I'm gonna, and this is something I didn't mention, if I'm gonna cross-hatch a tree and I want it to get really dark, so what I'll probably do is start, let's say, with the first layer, then I'm gonna have a second layer, again, I'm gonna have a third and a fourth. So the last one is quite messy, so what I'll do is start adding textures above it. So let's say this was a tree and I'd want to darken it more, I'll just add kind of a tree-like textures, okay? This is my 5th layer. So that's it in terms of that. Now we have the patches and the unified approach. So the patches, you just cross-hatch every area and you don't take the other ones into consideration. The unified says that if all of this needs darkening, I'm gonna darken all of that. And then if this needs to be a little darker, I'm gonna darken that. And finally, darken the last one. And I'm gonna keep an even direction. Okay, avoids mess, but it's impossible to do with large scale sketches, so you have to kind of find your own balance. And finally, we talked about avoiding a mess, as few different directions as possible, plus go denser if you have to create the dark value instead of making too many layers. Okay, so this is it in terms of cross-hatching. Let me know if this tutorial helps you, and let me know what other topics that are related to this you may want me to go over. Okay, I'll be really happy to cover more of these sketch videos as well. Because I went so deep into watercolor, I don't get to do as many of these, but I'm definitely attentive and want to do more of these. So let me know what you think, and this is it for this one. Let's wrap it up. So this is it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this vid. Again, it's something I don't touch upon a lot, drawing and sketching, and I do want to go back to making more tutorials about this and even do some urban sketching demos, things like this, because originally my channel started as a drawing and sketching channel, not as a painting, not as watercolor, but I was just captivated by the medium, and so I started painting and really just talking about watercolor, but I do want to do a lot of videos on drawing as well. I also think it's a very underestimated aspect of painting, because I see a lot of mistakes by beginners are starting with a wrong drawing, and it doesn't even mean that the person can't draw. It can also mean that they don't know how to draw for watercolor, okay? Because it's a bit of a different approach, and I do talk about it in some of my courses. I think it is important maybe I will make a separate video on that. I did make one with the Rosalach, the painting process, that I talk about the actual drawing that's required for for painting. But in any case, pen and ink is something I really enjoy. I do want to give it a little more emphasis and a little more, just to talk about it more in the future. I hope to do more on location videos of sketching and urban sketching. And this is it. I hope you enjoyed this one. Don't forget to subscribe and check out all of the links in the description box to my Patreon page, to my Instagram page, to my podcast. There's tons of cool stuff. The podcast is really cool. If you enjoy hearing me talk about different ideas, the podcast is where I really can zoom in and talk about topics that I don't get to do here a lot, because here it's more for practical demonstrations. And in the podcast, we can take a moment, relax, and talk in depth about creativity and art in general, and the business of art, and all sorts of topics that I don't get to touch here a lot. Okay, so anyway, check it all out. I really slowed down my pace near the end there. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in another vid real soon.